Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we continue with the compilation videos which are aimed at people who are working or people who are driving or people who just have a heck of a lot of time and want something on in the background. Alright, our first story today comes to us from FML, it's SML. Angry director gets her comeuppance in 4 gradual actions. Let's jump right in. Several years ago, I used to work at an agency that hired us out as short-term temporary workers and contractors. These jobs pretty much consisted of stuff that company employees couldn't be bothered to do, and so got someone in to sort it out. It wasn't great, but I had to make ends meet. Anyway, one of these jobs was for 150 hours at 5 weeks of office administration. There wasn't much more information to go on, but a job's a job. The office turned out to be quite a small, stuffy little building at the back of an industrial estate. I was told to report to Beryl. When I turned up, I was met by a rather grumpy-looking old lady having a cigarette by the front door. This was Beryl. Beryl didn't even say hello or ask me my name, but showed me in, pointed at an enormous pile of boxes full of paperwork, saying, "This all needs to be scanned in. There are 2 scanners connected to a computer there. Off you go. Let someone know if you need help." So off I went. That pile of boxes was to be my job for the next month and a bit. Joy. The office was predominantly young men, with Beryl being the only other woman. She was in her late 50s and spent more time smoking than working, and without being rude, clearly didn't look after herself. It was quite flattering to have a bunch of these guys pop by my workstation for a chat occasionally. After a few days of scanning, Beryl visited my cubicle. She wasn't happy that I spent too much time talking and not enough time working. I was confused. While I didn't have any metrics or targets, I was pretty consistently working through this mountain of paperwork. I got the impression that Beryl didn't like the attention I was getting. I pointed out to her that I haven't left my desk apart from to go to the toilet. If someone's over here to talk to me, then that's fine, as I can talk and scan at the same time, like I'm doing right now. She wasn't happy and turned away, calling out, "Just do your job," as she left. Some of the other guys had heard this and they popped by my desk later and said not to worry. They'd had agency staff before, and Beryl always hated it if a young woman arrived because she was grumpy and jealous. Not my words. In fact, a few years ago, one young woman had left the office in tears because Beryl had tore her a new one for going to lunch with some of the other guys. Naturally, this annoyed me, particularly because Beryl thought she could bully and disrespect agency staff. And I certainly wasn't going to leave the job because of an angry bee. Malicious compliance number 1. For the rest of my time there, I made sure to get dressed up. Makeup, curls, a midi office dress, stiletto heels. When Beryl saw me clicking my way down the office the next day, fully dressed up just to scan some paperwork, she scowled at me but didn't say anything. The next week, Beryl took some time out of her busy smoking schedule to visit me in my cubicle. The second time she'd done so since I started. Some of the paperwork I was scanning in had been stapled together, so I'd asked someone in the office for a staple remover and a stapler. I used to pull out the staple, scan the document, rename it on the computer, then restaple it and put back in the box. I was just pulling a staple out when Beryl walked by. Beryl's first words to me were, "What are you doing?" I replied that this document was stapled, and if I put it in the machine, it'd jam. She raised her voice slightly and said, "Nobody told you to do that. Just scan each page in separately. Leave the papers alone." I could almost hear her eye roll as she walked away. Malicious compliance number 2, so I did. Scanned everything with staples just folded over, and then created folders called document 123, and each scan went in as 123 page 1.pdf, 123 page 2.pdf, you get the idea. This slowed me down a lot, but hey, it's what I was asked to do. At some point, Beryl walked by and saw me flipping pages like that. I'd put my hair in a bun and taken my heels off, and she smirked. She thought she'd flustered me, and that I didn't see her reaction. Don't worry, Beryl, you didn't, and I did. The paperwork I was scanning in was boxed up as newest first, so as I got to some of the older papers, these had been moved around a couple of times and were slightly scrunched up or folded or similar. A jammed scanner wasn't an issue, it had happened a handful of times before. But as I got to the older papers, the jams became more frequent. It was easy to sort through, just open the back door of the scanner, roll out the paper, cancel the job, and redo it. At this point, I'd gone back to unstapling and restapling because Beryl had given me some space thinking she'd broken me, and I just wanted to get the job done so I could leave. Beryl walked in one day. This would have been my 4th week there. She saw me unjamming the scanner and flipped her top. She yelled, "SML, what are you doing?" At this point, all heads in the office turned to where we were. I calmly told her, "The scanner's jammed. I'm just pulling the paper out so I can rescan it. Shouldn't take more than a few minutes." She continued yelling, "At no point were you instructed to perform IT repairs. We have someone for that. Stop what you're doing and get someone to help you. I asked you this when you started. Why can't you follow simple instructions?" It took a lot of patience not to argue back with her, which I thought was what she wanted. But I said, "Okay, fine. Can I speak to the IT guy to sort this out?" I couldn't have choreographed her response better. I then knew that she did want me to argue so she could kick me out, because she hesitated and said, well, the IT guy is off for the rest of the week." This was a Thursday. Use the other scanner. If you jam it, let me know," and stormed off. Malicious compliance number 3. I knew her diary and knew she was off the next day, Friday. I carried on with the one scanner, making sure it didn't jam that day, and waited until the next morning. Coincidentally, the scanner jammed on the first piece of paper I fed into it. Who'd have thought? Obviously, I rang Beryl. She didn't answer her phone, and as she wasn't in the office, I spent the day sat around without much to do. Whilst talking to the guys in the office, I learned that the company had been bought by a much larger IT firm, and they just wanted the rights to the proprietary software that they had developed. It also turned out that the CEO of the small company basically paid himself into retirement and appointed Beryl as the director. Beryl knew that her days were numbered, so she was even more bitter to the staff. The guys working there had been committed various levels of careers within the new IT firm, which they were happy with. As I was told, 120,000 employees, 30 dev roles are easy to find. One director role is not. Anyway, when we returned on Monday, you could almost see the vein in her neck throbbing. She wasted an entire day of whatever her company paid my agency because little old me wasn't trusted to fix a paper jam. I used to get in a little later than the rest of the staff, agency perks, woo! But when I got in, she'd had the IT champion perform the skilled job of opening a scanner and pulling a piece of paper out. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Scanners are fixed, get on with your job and don't mess around." At this point, you may be thinking, SML, this is a lot of text for some pretty trivial malicious compliance. Well, you'll like the final part. My last week there coincided with a new contract that the company had been given by their new owners. I assume it was some sort of litmus test. Whilst I don't pretend to understand what it was, the job involved a lot of scanning documents that had been handwritten. Hooray, more boxes! At the same time, a few of the guys who worked there were going on a visit to the new parent company, which were based in the USA. I live in the UK. The IT champion was one of these guys who went. When the boxes were delivered to my cubicle, Beryl popped in and said, "These take priority. All of what I said to you is more important than ever. Do not mess around, otherwise you're out the door. Am I clear?" Yes, ma'am. The paperwork delivered was from the USA. Our paper sizes are different. The first piece of paper I fed into the scanner jammed it, a safety lock, because it expected A4 and got US letter instead. I jammed both scanners. Beryl, not being one to turn down a free trip to America, had gone with them. I rang her at 11 a.m. UK time, which was 5 a.m. their time. She picked up and was not impressed. I felt sorry for the folks adjacent to her hotel room when she screamed down the phone, "You've done what? How? Why?" I told her about the USA paperwork. "Can you not fix it?" Final malicious compliance. "No, you've told me many times that I can't fix these machines. What's the business continuity plan?" Side note, my brother told me that phrase and he still doesn't quite understand why I turned up to his house a bit later with a few pizzas and a box of beer. Beryl had no idea what to do. She was clearly flustered. "Can you just do what you can? We need this done." "What would you want me to do?" "Can you fix the scanners because this is really important?" "I'm sorry, you told me I can't do that. I need simple instructions to work with. Just fix it." I'd be happy to show an IT specialist where the scanners are if you can get them here to fix hang up tone. Well, that's that then. I spend the rest of the week chatting to my colleagues, updating my CV, and applying for jobs. Nobody turned up to fix the scanners. When my final week finished, I said bye to the guys I'd worked with, wished them luck, and left with none of the critical paperwork scanned in. When Beryl got back from her business trip, I learned that she'd spent one day at the parent company and left it to the other guys. When the crap hit the fan because nothing was being delivered, they wondered where she was. This was day 2 into the 5-day business trip. She was at a spa, phone switched off. She flew out early on day 5 without seeing any of her colleagues or the parent company. I kept in touch with a few of the guys afterwards. After this, the dev guys were transferred contracts to the larger IT firm. They all got a very small salary increase, but were also able to work from home. This was pre-COVID, so it was a bit of a rarity back then. Beryl, meanwhile, didn't fare so well. She was initially offered redundancy, paid, including pension deals, but when someone complained that she'd not been present for the meetings, which I think was their IT champion, they found out she'd been sightseeing, shopping, tanning, and getting her hair done on company time. She ended up being fired. No bonus, no pension, nothing. I quit the agency not long afterwards, and after 1 or 2 moves, ended up in a job I'm very happy with. The agency were none the wiser about any of this. They just wanted their money, and aside from one initial checkup call, left me to it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Harry Monk. It says, "She'd have got her pension when she reached the right age though, surely. In the UK, they don't just get to fire you and steal your pension. It's part of her compensation." This was responded to by another user called Pixeltash. It says, "Guessing she would have got early retirement and started getting her company pension early. This is what she lost. Because she didn't work to pension age and didn't get early retirement, she would have lost a big old chunk of her company pension. She would still get her state pension and whatever private company pension she had paid into when she turned 65. I think that commenter missed that this was in the UK, but that's okay because it's probably the same over there as well. From what I've heard about labor laws over in the UK and how that all works, it's a lot better than it is over here in Canada and the USA. Over here, they really have us over a barrel. Our next story today comes to us from ex-Wall Street guy. "I cost Bank of America $8,000 legally." Let's jump right in. A bit of context, I've been in the mortgage and related businesses for over 30 years. I know it very well. I've never liked Bank of America, especially their servicing division. This story happened a few years ago. I just found out about this group. I refinanced my mortgage through a mortgage broker, and to my aggravation, they sold the servicing rights to Bank of America. The entity that owns your loan is usually different than the one that you pay to service the loan. I was miffed. I estimated that a Bank of America paid $5,000 to service my loan, as most folks at the time expect loans to stay on the books at least 3 years. Another little fact, mortgage services are paid 0.25% fixed, 0.375% adjustable of your outstanding loan balance per year. It comes out of the interest you pay to the bank. If you want to know how much your servicer got any particular month, use the formula service pay equals current loan balance times 0.25% over 12. About 2 months after the servicing switched, Bank of America announced they'd be charging a $5 fee for the convenience to pay the mortgage online. Truly an unwarranted money grab. I'm blessed that I can put a little extra towards my mortgage payment every month. So the following month, I took out my mortgage payment plus $400 in quarters from my local bank. I then went to my local Bank of America branch and handed them my mortgage payment in quarters and repayment stub. I asked for a receipt of payment. I overpaid my mortgage to reduce the current balance and thereby reducing Bank of America's fees. The nice branch manager said, "You can write a check, you don't have to pay in coins." I said I could, but I would charge a $9.50 convenience fee for the stamp, my check, and ink used. The branch manager actually laughed and said, "Okay." They counted the money and I got my receipt. Next month, the charge was still there. So I went to another local Bank of America branch which had gotten bad reviews on Yelp due to a hostile bank manager. I did the same thing. The branch manager said, "Write a check, we don't accept quarters." I said, "Shall I call the local state's banking commissioner, the Consumer Financial Protection Board, and the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, the US top bank regulator, and say you won't accept legal tender?" I asked to talk to the district manager. I was making a stink. After about 20 minutes, he grudgingly had the staff count the quarters, and I got a receipt. I told the manager that I would be bringing dimes next time. The next month, I brought dimes. He accepted them but glared at me the whole time. After that payment, Bank of America rescinded their convenience fee. The month after that, I refinanced my mortgage at a lower rate. Bank of America only got roughly 6 months of fees for servicing they expected to last 3 years at a minimum, 5 years to be profitable. One of my proudest malicious compliance moments. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Mayday Voter 11. It says, "Someone in the mortgage industry once told me that the big banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, etc. hate their mortgage business, but they don't want to get rid of it, so they take their frustration out on the borrower." Not sure if that's actually true, but every mortgage horror story I've heard like this involved a big bank like Bank of America or Wells Fargo. OP responded to this one and said, "Hate is too strong a word, but it is a burden for them. Now, most mortgages are serviced by non-bank servicers like New Residential, Mr. Cooper, Freedom Mortgage, and etc. Should mortgages have a serious increase in delinquencies, these companies go down, and oh boy, that'll be a mess for the US economy." So going back to OP paying in coins, because I'm really not up on all this mortgage talk, but up here in Canada, you can't actually do that. So there are laws here on how many coins you can pay with of any specific denomination. Now, that being said, if you walked into a bank here and said, "I want to pay my mortgage with all of these coins," they could say, "I'm sorry, I can only take so many of them." But if you walked into the bank and said, "Hi, I'd like to make a deposit of all these coins to my account," well, there's nothing they could do about that. Just something I thought I'd pass on to my Canadian listeners because you never know when you're going to need it. Our next story today comes to us from HandCan44. Mandatory overtime. Let's jump right in. I just found this sub and thought I'd share my story. A few years back, I was working for a work truck manufacturing company. I really enjoyed the work I was doing, and I was good at it. Unfortunately, this place had, and still does have, a reputation as a revolving door, due to the disposable view they have of their techs. We were referred to as a heartbeat and tools at one point by the GM. The turnover led to a severe imbalance in experienced versus inexperienced workforce, and it was compounded by their answer to production slowdowns. They fired the bottom 20% every winter and would hire new techs with zero experience and mandatory overtime every summer. The latter is the point of my story. I have always stood by the adage, "I work to live, I don't live to work," meaning I don't care for overtime. I budgeted my life to be able to turn down overtime when offered. I'm a team player and will always do my part when needed. However, this pattern of seasonal forced overtime was starting to wear thin. At one point, the company was bought out by a larger corporation, and some of our HR policies changed. One change was overtime being calculated on a daily basis instead of weekly. Another change was having 10 unpaid personal days with no reason or notice required to use them. Of course, the average underpaid tech living paycheck to paycheck would never use an unpaid personal day. The company knew that, and it was strictly for PR. They could claim that employees had personal days even though they never intended for us to use them. It didn't take long for me to realize that with a forced 9.5-hour day, if they worked us 10, they would be required to give us another paid break, and overtime calculated daily, I could call in on Fridays and use my unpaid personal day, but still come out ahead. 32 regular hours plus 6 overtime hours equals the equivalent of 41 regular hours. I decided I had enough and I was going to enjoy 10 3-day weekends for my summer. After my third Friday off, I was called into my manager's office. My manager, his manager, and the HR director were waiting for me. I was confronted about taking 3 Fridays off in a row, and they demanded an explanation or excuse as to why I was taking them off. I calmly referred to our employee handbook, which explains that no excuse or reason is required for personal days. They asked how I could afford to use these unpaid personal days. I had nothing to hide, so I explained the math, much to their surprise. I was then lectured by management, who told me I was abusing the system and I needed to stop or else. The HR director immediately corrected them and told management there was nothing they could do because I was not breaking any rules. At that point, I was pretty heated. I told them, I'm one of your top performers and I know it. If I am disciplined or fired, I will assume it's because of this meeting and I will seek legal counsel. I have not broken any rules, and you should be grateful I haven't pointed out this loophole to the other technicians. I got one more Friday off before mandatory overtime was discontinued. I found out later that the general manager was reprimanded when he tried taking the issue to corporate. They found out he was forcing OT, which was against the corporate policy. The following year, the 10 unpaid days were turned into 2 extra vacation days. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called MaximumDealer6208. It says, why would you tell them the math? You don't have to explain your day off, nor do you have to explain how you pay your bills. Now, you no longer get 3-day weekends, silly. Another user responded to this comment named PineappleLogical5654. It says, absolutely. I once had a supervisor who loved to remind me that I couldn't afford to lose my job because I just bought a car. I knew my car was paid for. I also knew she'd find something else to pick on if I told her, so I just nodded along and let her think she had something over me. Don't feed them. Did anybody else hear that management team shoot themselves in the foot because they said, how can you afford to take that day off? Well, management, does that mean that you know you're paying them the bare minimum to get by? Because it sure sounds to me like that's your plan. But OP, what's been commented here is absolutely true. They have no right to know what you use your days for, especially since they put that in their handbook, and they have no right to know what you spend your money on, or what your financial situation is, so screw them. Our next story today comes to us from Black Hat Ran. Want access to all employee emails? Enjoy your smoking device then. Let's jump right in. Hello Reddit, this is my first time posting on this sub, and English is not my first language, so I apologize in advance if I write something confusing. This was not that big of a deal, but even after years, I still find it funny. This happened years back when I was working as an IT for a relatively large engineering company, around 5 to 6 branches in our place. It was a great workplace. This was a family-owned business, and since it was funded using the father's, let's call him Dick, money, he was given the VIP privilege. Basically, everything he requests should be done without consideration, even if it F's up the process, yada yada. Everyone in the office and most of the people on the other sites, people get transferred to other sites for managerial positions or to fill up any vacant positions frequently, knows this and would constantly talk about him and his unrealistic demands. Like one time, he requested to have access to all user emails since he fears sabotage from resigning and terminated employees and wants their login info to be sent to him on an Excel sheet. This was declined, of course. Dick is also known for being an alcoholic, drinking as early as 4 a.m. inside his office, and would lash out at anybody when drunk. The IT guys were the common target for his lashing out, since it's unavoidable that employees experience issues with their devices and would tell us that this should not be happening. Why are we even paying you for this? I was on the middle of my 30-day notice when we received an email from Dick asking for all shared emails to be delegated to him, aside from those whom he already has access, all 12 of them. In case you're not familiar with Outlook, emails are stored locally in a file inside your device. More accounts you have access to equals more storage space consumed. Even when there's a max storage space of 50 gigabytes for these files, you can alter the maximum up to 300 gigabytes, but we never do this. Well, we did it once for him. Our team has gone to the lengths of convincing him not to do it since it would consume a F-ton amount of space on his device, and we could delegate to him the emails he needs at the moment instead. Then delegate some more later if a need arises. basically saying his request is unnecessary, but nah, he wants them now, he wants them fast, and he wants them stored inside since he wants to look at the emails even without the internet on. Since we realized there was no convincing Dick about the risk, MaliciousCompliance knocked on the door, asked to be let in, and crapped on the floor. All shared folders were delegated to him, having around 20 to 30 gigabytes of emails and attachments each, configured to automatically download and be saved locally. The next day we got a request to procure another laptop for Dick. Turns out, while the emails were syncing, it got to a point where his storage was bottoming up. The device was starting to freeze a lot, and whenever he tries to delete other files just to make up available space, it would get replaced by all the emails that were being synced in. He got so frustrated that he punched a hole in the screen. It's to say we were asked to revert what we did the day prior and set up his new device. Very nice event before I left the company. Okay, first of all, I need to go back to this line, and I'm not going to censor it this time, so maybe turn your volume down, where OP said, MaliciousCompliance knocked on the door, asked to be let in, and shat on the floor. That is one of the best sentences I've ever read in MaliciousCompliance, bar none. Well done, OP. In the comment section for this one, there's one from a user called M the Strange. It says, I don't know why, but MaliciousCompliance stories from IT are always so good. OP responded to this comment and said, it's one of the underappreciated parts in a business, and most of the time, people make absurd requests, but underestimate the consequences. Stepping back and looking at this one from the outside, how the heck does management not listen to IT when they recommend something they should be doing? That's what these people are paid for, to make sure that all of your electronic stuff works properly. But you're not going to listen to what they say about something electronic? That's just dumb. Our next story today comes to us from Mummy Longlegs. You're mad that I shaved my head? Alright, I'll make sure to never shave again. Let's jump right in. Hey y'all, little disclaimer, this is my first ever post on this site, so I apologize if my formatting is a bit off. I'm not much of a writer, let alone a super duper dramatic revenge plot one. Haha. Earlier last year, my family decided to throw me a surprise Sweet 16 party, which all of our extended family members were invited to. Among those invited was my aunt, who we'll call Carol, who is known in our family to be super conservative, unlike her husband, who tends to be more open-minded than her, though to be quite frank, the bar was on the floor. Since it was my Sweet 16, I decided to try out something new in regards to my appearance I've always wanted to do, but never quite got the chance to. That being shaving my head. Little note, my aunt has always admired and complimented my long hair, mostly due to the fact that it heavily resembled the way she wore her hair when she first met my uncle in the 70s. So you can only imagine the expression on her face when she saw me walk into the room with a buzz cut. And so, over the course of the party, while I got many weird looks from my more conservative family members, none were as fierce as my aunt's. She continuously made passive-aggressive remarks in regards to my new hair, or rather, lack thereof. I tried my best to laugh them off, but with the things she was saying slowly getting a lot lighter on the passive part, and a lot heavier on the aggressive bit, it kept getting harder to do so. When my birthday party eventually came to a close, as we were all saying our goodbyes, instead of bidding farewell like everyone else, Carol, now with her composure nowhere near in sight, starts berating both me and my parents for letting me shave my oh so precious hair off, saying how a woman like me should never even as much as hold a razor anywhere near her hair. Cue MaliciousCompliance. It took me all my willpower not to lash back out at her, but I somehow managed to hold myself back. And in the middle of her yelling, it's like a light bulb lit up in my head. And so, taking her advice, I swore to not shave any of my body hair until at least the next time I saw her, which was not long since Thanksgiving is not too far away. And with that, the next 3 to 4 months were not only a delight not having to worry about shaving, but also strangely cathartic. I did everything in my power to make my leg and arm hair grow faster. You could name any method for hair growth, and I guarantee I have tried it. When Thanksgiving finally rolled around the corner, I made sure to pick out some clothes that revealed most of my arms and legs to piss her off even more. As I came up to meet Carol, the expression that washed up on her face can only be described as an unholy mix of both disgusted and horrified. Before I could even get within 2 feet of her, she quickly rushed to the bathroom with her hands over her mouth. After what seemed like an eternity of painfully fake retching sounds, she finally exited the bathroom and started loudly screaming at me about how I look like a man, and how me letting myself go had literally made her sick to her stomach, also making sure to compare me to big hairy animals while she was at it. Slowly, a crowd formed around us. Embarrassed by his wife, my uncle forcefully dragged Carol away by her hand and out the door as everyone in the room froze up a bit. Since then, my uncle has profusely apologized to me, and my aunt has insisted on not appearing at any family gatherings if I was there. And in the not so off chance cousin L happens to be reading this, I'm so sorry you have such crappy parents, girl. Jumping down to the comment section, in this one we have one from a user called HMS Slarty Bartfast. It says, "Have you started taking pictures to send to relatives? Nice pictures of you in shorts, telling them how much better you feel about yourself, taking your aunt's advice, how liberating it is not basing your self-worth on the opinions of others, and that you'd encourage them to thank your aunt for pointing out how shallow it would be to base your entire worldview around how others see you." I really don't understand why this aunt cares what OP looks like. I mean, it doesn't have any bearing on the aunt's life at all. Like, is the aunt taking them out with them wherever they go? Are their friends looking at them and going, "Oh my gosh, what have you done? You're a horrible person because you're walking around with that one who shaved all their hair off. Oh my gosh." OP, one more thing to double check here though. Are you sure your aunt's name is Carol? Because I have a feeling her name was actually Karen. Our next story today comes to us from Careless Series 1596. Don't want to be asked for anything more? Okay, no problem. Let's jump right in. So, a few years ago, I worked as an administrator of a finance company. It was my job to create contract documents and ensure everything was secure and legit, especially as in the case I'm about to describe, when we are purchasing from a private seller, not an established storefront. Could even be a guy off of Kijiji. So one day I'm asked to email a new private seller about something our client is purchasing from him. I sent my standard email noting all the things we need from this private seller. Let's call him Bob. Bob called me shortly after receiving the email and was super slimy on the phone. He was being flirty and kept saying he wanted to meet for coffee and discuss me working for them instead, after one standard email. I got a bad feeling about this guy, like he was trying to get away with something, so I made a mental note to really watch what he sent in. Over the course of the next few days, he sent in everything except what I asked for. He was getting ruder every time we spoke or emailed, and was calling our client, telling them how we were the worst company he could have chosen to deal with. He said he has the right to not supply the info we're looking for. And of course, that's true, but that cancels the sale, which he didn't want. So one morning he finally sends me the document I was waiting for. Within his email to me, Bob made it very clear that we were ridiculous and this is the last thing he is providing us, so don't even bother asking. I opened it up and it was clearly fraudulent. Anyone at my office would have said the same thing, and there is no way we were going to accept it. After discussing with my sales guy, I responded to the email and said, "Hi Bob, thank you for sending this over. However, as it's been clearly edited in a fraudulent way, we cannot accept it. You mentioned in your email that we shouldn't ask for anything else, so I won't. We have spoken to our mutual client and have agreed to cancel this transaction and won't be speaking to you further. Have a great day." He ended up calling both our mutual client and the sales guy in a panic, wanting to backtrack and get the sale done and would provide what we need. Obviously, we blacklisted this guy and never did business with him again. In the comment section for this one, there's one from a user called StinkyFeet205. It says, "That's the typical scammer MO. They try to scare and bully people into doing what they want, legal or not. Good for you for giving him the boot." This was responded to by another user called NYVN. It says he deliberately drug out the process in the hopes that they would be on a time crunch and rush, missing that the document had issues. Kinda makes you wonder how many times Bob has actually gotten away with this, not with this company maybe, but with many other companies, because it seems like Bob knows what he's doing, and he's been able to get his way in the past. Been able to sneak things by on companies and make bank on of it by doing fraudulent sales. I'd say in this case it might be worth it for OP to make a couple of phone calls to other similar companies and see if they've ever dealt with this person, because it might take more than just OP's company to take this person down. Our next story today comes to us from Throw It All Away 2364. The credit for my work cost $5,500. Let's jump right in. I'm going to be very vague to not bog this down with jargon. I work in a fairly prestigious biology lab on the East Coast where we study various pathogens, and for one project, I was trying to isolate a certain bacteria from samples containing a wide array of species in order to infect mice with the strain under various conditions. While doing research to see if there were mediums that were selective for the target bacteria, or if there were antibiotics that my target was resistant against that would kill everything else, I ended up with various ways to isolate the bacteria, using a process I thought of myself to test the efficacy of each isolation method. Before starting my experiment, I ran it by my coworker who is a seasoned immunologist of 10 years, let's call him Dan, who trained me in working with bacteria when I started the job. I'll probably rant about Dan in another post. He thinks it's great and gives it the green light, and for the next 2 months I'm running the experiments, calling biotech pharma companies for quotes on their products that I'm using to isolate the bacteria, and end up with a big spreadsheet that contained both the efficacy and the cost-benefit analyses of all the methods I came up with or found. I show my results to Dan and he's ecstatic, although he mentions that it's likely going to be a while before we use the data and make a decision on the isolation method due to us waiting on samples to come in. I send this spreadsheet along to my PI anyway, head scientist at a lab, and shift my time to other projects I'm working on. Another couple months go by, and after not hearing anything from Dan about patient samples, another coworker comes up to me and asks me where I could find a set of certain plates to isolate the target bacteria from. I'm confused and ask him why he's looking for those, because based on my experiments, the plates he wanted were the least efficient and most expensive way to select the bacteria we were looking for. Not to mention that I had no idea that we had ordered any more than the 10 plates I used to run my experiment. He argued me and said that Dan's research said otherwise. That confused me even more, and when I asked him to show me what he was talking about, he proceeded to show me my own spreadsheet, where he quickly realized that he had been misled and said that Dan must have made an error in the spreadsheet. I told him that I was the one who ran the experiments and got the results, and if Dan ordered the bad plates, then he had just wasted the lab's money. The other coworker said I probably told Dan to order the wrong plates, but when I said I had no idea plates were being ordered at all he had to say to that was, "Oh, that's weird." Sure enough, later that day, I look inside our cold room and see several boxes, roughly $5.5 thousand worth of the expensive and inefficient plates, and I confront Dan about it. I asked Dan why he ordered so many plates, and if he had been telling other people that he had done the experiments. He laughs a little before asking if I even read the spreadsheet that I made, and states that the plates he ordered were the best based on my criteria, and that because he taught me how to work with bacteria, I was piggybacking his methods, and that him validating my experiment before running it was tantamount to him doing the work. He told me not to worry about it anymore, and that he would be presenting the data to the PI because he had already prepared a slideshow and everything for it. I wanted to open up the spreadsheet and tell him that he had just wasted a lot of money, but he was so condescending and sure of himself about having ownership of my work that all I said was, "Okay," before returning to my bench. Later that week, we have our lab meeting where Dan is presenting his work to the whole lab, and states that we can finally move ahead with isolating the target bacteria from patient samples. Sure enough, my spreadsheet is on the TV used as our projector, and my PI asks when we could expect the materials used in the most efficient isolation method to arrive. Dan corrects the PI, stating that the bad plates were the best, and very proudly stated that the plates had already arrived. I then interjected very bluntly, saying that the plates he ordered would recover over 90% less of the bacteria than the method my PI had picked from the spreadsheet. Dan fell silent, face going shades of red, before he stumbled through a justification of ordering the bad plates, how in the long run we'd save money by not ordering the materials needed to do the method my PI wanted, only for my PI to chime in, stating it was absolutely worth it if it meant a tenfold increase in recovery, and that we shouldn't be wasting samples, time, and money on bad plates. Dan very quickly blurted out that it was my spreadsheet, and that there must have been a miscommunication between us before ordering the plates before he quickly sat down. And all I said was that I was not told by anyone that anything off my spreadsheet was being ordered. My PI asked Dan if he submitted the data to me before I sent it to him, and Dan sheepishly admitted that I was the one who ran the experiments and compiled everything. So he must have misread my data and ordered the wrong materials, and was about to suggest that I possibly misspoke when showing him my data the first time before my PI cut him off to move on to the next lab topic. The rest of the meeting, he was red, glaring at me out of the corner of his eye. After the lab meeting, Dan pulled me aside and asked me why I didn't tell him that he ordered the bad plates. I told him that since it was his research, he should have known what method gave the best results, since he would have calculated the yield of each method when doing the experiments, and that if he wanted my input, he should have told me before he ordered them. I went to the PI and cleared up the confusion, putting in the right order for the materials needed to best isolate the target bacteria from our samples, and making sure he knew I had no idea that my data was being acted upon in case Dan went behind my back to somehow throw me under the bus. Needless to say, we communicated far less after that whole ordeal, and I quickly found other people in the lab to work with. I later found out that he had been taking credit for all the work I did ever since starting in the lab. And while it frustrates me to still have to tell people every now and then that I made the figures or did the experiments that Dan had told them about when my data comes up, more people have come to me to discuss their projects and ask for my help since Dan was exposed. And I find solace in the memory of his red, twisted face looking like it was going to explode in front of everyone, barely able to make out a word to cover his butt. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called AccomplishedSir5178. It says, "So he stole your work, blamed you for a mistake, admitted it was your research, and was shamed in front of everyone? Priceless." This honestly sounds to me like any kind of research or academia facility, because this is just how it goes, unfortunately. Most people won't step up and say, hey, that was my work, and sometimes if you even look into your work contract, you might find out that you just don't have the ability to take credit for that work, and it goes to the person heading up the department. I'm glad OP was able to get the recognition that they needed, but I have a feeling this is going to happen again. Our next story today comes to us from Canadian Cosmic Entity. Shut the F up, get in the truck, and do what you're told? You got it. Let's jump right in. So, I live in a pretty small city by American standards in Canada, 250,000 people. People joke that it's a giant small town, and it's hard to go somewhere without knowing someone who either knows you or heard of you. I run a small contracting business that maintains properties for seniors. Think grass mowing, tree trimming, etc. In the winter, there isn't a lot going on, so I lay off the summer crew and usually bounce around to different companies to help them with their snow removal. I hold a CDL as well as equipment operator license, among others, so most of the larger companies know me and are more than happy to have me around. Over the weekend, I was called by the biggest company in my city to help with hauling snow to the city's snow dump, a gravy job, and lots of hours. I had never worked with their crew, but quickly got along with everyone but the company grump, which was expected. Of course, the company grump is the one working on the weekend loading trucks. After the first location, he gave me some cash to get us coffee. I meet him at the next location and hand him his drink. He takes a drink and noticed it's wrong. He gets out of the Bobcat and throws the full extra large coffee into the distance, getting caught by the wind, spraying me with liquid, all while cursing me out. I decided to let it go. Everyone has been working long hours and well, some people in construction are just giant man children. I offered to grab him another coffee and he declined. I went back to my truck to drink my coffee and talk to the other driver in my truck when the operator comes over to our truck to be at us about his coffee, after I offered to get him another. Shortly after, I realized I had his change in my pocket. Knowing this guy, I better return it. I walk over to the Bobcat to give him his money and let him know if he did that again, there would be problems. We had a few words before he told me to shut the F up, get back in my truck, and do what I was told. And if I did, stuff like that wouldn't happen. So I did. I went back to my truck and did as I was told. Little did the operator know he's been on thin ice, and I was told by his boss to let him know if we had any problems with him. Furious, I jumped in my truck, called his boss, and went home. Not even 20 minutes later, I get a call from his boss telling me they fired him and begging me to come back. Moral of the story is treat each other with respect, especially in the workplace. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Massic Keel. It says, I know that type, gets warned a dozen times, but when it happens, they're totally surprised. OP responded to this comment and said, yep, this guy is nearly 50 apparently. This was done on government property too, and if I complained to the customer, I would never do that. They could lose the contracts, so there's no room for that, especially when you work for a household name. Some people just have no respect for anyone. I think one of the major problems in the construction industry is that, well, people just assume that somebody like him's going to get what's coming to them, but it rarely happens because they don't get reported. If you assume that somebody else is going to do it, and that somebody else assumes that somebody else is going to do it, it never happens, and this idiot still gets to run rampant like they're doing right now. So they actually got to face some consequences in this case because OP did what they were told to do and made sure that the upper management knew that this guy was being a gigantic butthole. More people really do need to be held accountable for their actions. This next story comes to us from Ronark. 10,000 steps a day or else. Let's jump right in. Years ago, long before smartphones or Fitbits, a coworker of mine, Bob, had a relatively mild heart attack. We joked in secret that it was caused by his wife, but the other secret is we weren't really joking. She was awful. She was just an intolerable person, and no one liked her. I'm pretty sure Bob didn't like his own wife. If he did, it was probably Stockholm Syndrome. At any rate, when Bob returned to work, he returned with a pedometer clipped to his belt. Every day, Bob would walk as much as he could when he wasn't pinned down to his desk. But he was suffering, and his work was suffering. As his supervisor at the time, I figured he was struggling with his recovery, so we just moved a lot of his work to others and left him with the cases he specialized in. That worked for everyone, because those cases drove others nuts and he was a whiz at them. His other work was comparatively easy. However, at the end of his first full week back, the issue became more clear. I overheard Bob's wife berating him in the parking lot because he didn't even meet half of his step goal. Turns out, the pedometer didn't come from his doctor, it came from his wife. She was demanding that Bob increase from his current 4,200 steps a day that were almost killing him to somehow 10,000 steps a day. This will read at least 10,000 at the end of every workday, or it'll be your butt, were her words. Now, Bob was a tall guy with long strides, so she was somehow expecting him to fit in over 6 miles of walking during his workday while recovering. But you know, since he'd had a heart attack, maybe she was just looking out for him, right? Nope, his doctor had actually cautioned him against overdoing it. He was only supposed to be walking 1.5 miles a day, and not all at once. But his wife wasn't having it. She demanded more, and he tried but wasn't doing so well. After another week of this and another chewing out in the parking lot, we developed a plan. Bob's pedometer just sat on the corner of his desk while he was working. If anyone had to walk down the hall or to the other building, they'd grab the pedometer on their way out of the office. Bob did have to tolerate another couple of butt chewings because we ramped him up to 10,000 steps instead of jumping straight there. We figured that would be suspicious otherwise. In the end, Bob got his 10,000 steps every day. Well, Bob's pedometer registered over 10,000 steps every day, and almost a third of them were actually his steps. Bob was overjoyed to have the help, and we were all willing to keep the secret because we were frightened of her turning on us. Teamwork makes the dream work. Okay, is anybody else here wondering if Bob's wife has a hefty insurance policy on Bob? Because it sounds like she wants him to have another heart attack. This is echoed by a commenter down below named Ace of Nations. They said, it sounds like that woman was intentionally trying to provoke a deadly heart attack. OP responded to this one and said, I don't care what the subject is, what your expertise is, or how little she knows about the subject, she'll often have a contrary opinion and demand it should be treated as the word of God. So maybe she was trying to kill him off, but completely disregarding the doctor's orders and imposing her own unreasonable demand was totally on brand for her. One time, she'd made Bob apologize for insisting that Arkansas is a state. When it had been pointed out to her on a map, she claimed that it was Arkansas, and Bob was only calling it Arkansas out of ignorance. We may or may not have made a point of fitting Arkansas into discussions anytime she was in earshot. Since we dealt with state agencies, that wasn't hard. I've genuinely never known a more disagreeable person. Okay, this woman sounds horrible, and you'll wonder why Bob had the heart attack in the first place. Probably because he had to deal with her on a daily basis. I need to remind you all again that life is too short to be unhappy, so if you're in a situation like Bob is in, it might be time to move on and find somebody that will, complement your life, be part of your life, not try to destroy your life like his wife is right now. Our next story today comes to us from Lentesta. Apartment manager doesn't take cash for a 2-cent bill. Malicious compliance ensues. Let's jump right in. In 2019, I moved from an apartment complex in Celebration, Florida to a condo. As usual, when you move out of an apartment, you get a final bill, which includes your last month's prorated rent, deductions for damages, security deposit refunds, and the like. We paid it. The next month, I get a call from my wife who says we've gotten a follow-up bill in the mail from the apartment management company for 2 cents. We're both in the tech field, so we laughed that this company's IT department didn't catch the edge case of spending 50 cents in postage to collect 2 cents in revenue, but it happens. My wife prints out a copy of the bill. I grab 2 cents from the change jar. The apartment complex is on my daily drive, so I swing by the office. I walk in and tell the manager that I want to pay my last bill. I say, it's 2 cents, here's the bill, and I have the 2 cents if you want it. The manager says, we don't take cash, nothing else. There was an awkward pause. I say, I don't expect you to take cash. I expect both of us to have a laugh about how silly computer systems are and for you to write off the 2 cents because it'd cost you more to process the payment. She says, I'm not going to do that. Again, awkward pause. I say, so you want me to write you a check for 2 cents and mail it, and you're going to process that check? The manager says, yes, send us a check and we'll process it, and then walks back into her office to end the conversation. So I go home and set up an automatic monthly bank payment to my apartment complex for 3 cents. And then, because I'm a programmer, I write some code to send a letter once per month saying, I'm so sorry, I've overpaid my bill. Please send me a check for the overpayment. And I use an online service that sends postcards in ridiculous sizes, up to around 18 inches by 24 inches, figuring that'll be my escalation strategy. The first of the next month, I get a call from the apartment company's regional manager. After introducing himself, the next 2 minutes were the most sincere, oh God, we made a mistake, please don't do this, we'll never contact you again, apology anyone could have hoped for. I stopped the mail and never heard from them again. Did I spend several hours on malicious compliance for 2 cents? Yes. Was it worth it? Absolutely. I highly recommend going to the link in the description for story number 4 because there are so many similar stories in the comment section for this one that I spent entirely too long reading through them, and I recommend that you guys read through some of them as well. Our next story today comes to us from Baroness Indecisive. Vote with my feet? Don't mind if I do. Let's jump right in. In my old role, compliance for a financial institution, we used to be split into 2 groups, investigations and alerts. Alerts did the first level of processing of items that came in and then determined whether they should be escalated for further review, sent to investigations, or closed out. Alerts was expected to get through 8 to 15-ish items per day, depending on referral channel and other factors, while investigations was lucky in some areas to get through 2 per day. Some cases could take days or weeks to do. I worked in investigations, specifically within Treasury, which was considered the most complex area, and I primarily dealt with the high scrutiny, high complexity items like law enforcement referrals. I was also the main trainer for Treasury, particularly complex cases, and had created all of the training materials and processes. Additionally, I worked as the point of contact representative on the procedures management group, so I knew them inside and out. What it boils down to is that I made myself the keystone species of the department, albeit inadvertently. As happens with any organization, there was an ebb and flow of employees in our area, but for the most part we stuck around because we were treated fairly, enjoyed our work, and had senior leadership who actually tried to understand what we did and why we do it. We weren't dealing with people who thought they knew better and who would make arbitrary decisions for the sake of implementing change and saying that they did something. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it worked pretty well. That all changed when they decided to merge alerts and investigations together and make everyone do everything. Things went downhill quite quickly, especially because the leadership that was given control was from alerts. As far as they were concerned, a case is a case is a case. It's not. And you should be able to get through all things quickly. You can't. And they're all created equally. They aren't. They put undue pressure on folks to get through the caseload far faster than was feasible, if you do it right anyway, and removed all specialization, which made it incredibly difficult to get into the groove of the work because different areas had different expectations and procedures. To add to that, they promoted people who had no business being elevated, Peter Principle anyone? And ignored tenured investigators who should have been first up. All that did was piss off the good employees and create a whole bunch of post-turtles in leadership roles. As one would expect, attrition skyrocketed. They weren't paying us nearly enough to deal with the BS, so people left for both internal and external roles at alarming rates. When the pandemic hit, we were, for the most part, stuck. Hiring freezes galore, and there's always a fear of leaving and then getting screwed and being jobless during the disaster that was and is the world. A bit more background, at work I have always had a reputation for honesty and for speaking my mind, sometimes to the chagrin of senior leadership. As far as I'm concerned, you can't complain about something if you don't try to fix it. So when everything was at peak awfulness, I said something on a call with the aforementioned senior leadership, knowing that it was unlikely anything was going to change, but at least I would know I tried. I was later pinged by one of the managing directors in our overarching department, not up my direct reporting line, but in the same organization. We'll call him C. I worked with C a number of times over the years. He had a rocket strapped to his butt and was perfectly content to ride that puppy until he could go no further. He is definitely a bit of a yes man, but that's what generally happens when you're in that type of role. I am unlikely to ever become a yes woman because it's not my personality, but it takes all kinds, and you never know what might happen in the future. When C pinged me, he asked if I could chat and give him some more details about the situation. I knew I had nothing to lose. See Keystone Species. So we got on a call and I explained the problems and my opinions on proposed solutions. More staffing, revert back to specialization in case types, pay industry standard, have leadership work on acquiring a better understanding of the job so as to be able to make more informed decisions, etc. Nothing unreasonable, though I knew that it was unlikely any of it would be done. C's response? Vote with your feet. About what I expected, but I was impressed that he went right out and said it, especially because we both knew the whole department would be screwed if I left. I'm sure he figured I would never leave. After all, I had stayed for almost 8 years already, even though the awfulness didn't truly start until fairly late in the game. Fast forward a couple months to summer 2021. I had been focusing on finding another role. I had been even before talking with C, but that gave me renewed incentive. I was being particular about what I applied for because I didn't want to leave for the sake of leaving. especially knowing that any internal move would mean I was stuck for a year and didn't want to risk screwing myself out of something perfect by jumping the gun. My caution paid off, and I was offered an amazing internal opportunity that pretty much fit me like a glove. I kept my move quiet for a variety of reasons, only telling my manager, but I knew it would eventually make it up the chain. I just wanted to keep it as quiet as possible for as long as possible. Well, a week or so before I was scheduled to start in my new role, I got a ping from C asking me to hop on a call. He had seen the leave report and wanted to ask me why I was going and whether they could convince me to stay. They couldn't. I got on the call, video, and when he asked me why I was leaving, I looked at him and said, "Well, see, I'm just doing what you told me to do." He gave me a Cocker Spaniel look, complete with head tilt, and I just smiled and said, "I'm voting with my feet." The satisfaction I got from the look on his face when he made that connection brought me so much joy. He was so crestfallen. It was just chef's kiss. Now, OP didn't add an edit onto the story itself, but fortunately when I was digging through the comments on this one, I found an update from OP. It says, "For those asking, the department has imploded since I danced my way out. They have lost all but one of their original people. One of them I may have poached for my new department, and the one left is only staying because he needs the flexibility in his schedule that he was able to put into place before things got super horrible. Permitted because it was for childcare. He goes in, does precisely his job, and leaves, and even he is actively looking. So they're going to lose him sooner rather than later because even with the flexibility, he knows it really isn't worth it." My old manager was finally able to escape too. Senior leadership in that department has a reputation for blocking internal moves unless someone with more pull manages to push it through. So it took a long time before he was able to get away from it. The powers that be don't seem to understand that blocking you from leaving isn't going to force you to stay, it's going to make you go external and they'd lose you entirely, rather than just to a different area. But when the next consent order hits, they'll wish they had made other choices, I imagine, and I will play a tiny, tiny violin for them. And I did make sure that C and his boss were among those who received my best of luck to everyone. It's been swell, I'm off on a new adventure email, complete with new title, which they refused to give me in my old group. OP, thank you so much for this comment where you wrapped up a little bit more of what was going on. We don't get that on nearly enough of these stories. Now, this boss telling you that you should vote with your feet, I'm guessing they thought you wouldn't. They must have thought that saying that would shut down what you were thinking and that you'd be staying in that job forever like a good little worker bee. But I guess they don't understand that there are many other jobs out there that you could be doing, and well, you just tried to better yourself. It's not your fault if management doesn't have a contingency plan when you're the only one who knows how to do things in your department and you decide to leave. That's completely not on you, that's on management. Our next story today comes to us from I Look Better Than You. You want me to work at full capacity? No problem. Can you tell my colleagues to say goodbye to their bonuses? Thanks. Let's jump right in. I work in a help desk call center as a first-line agent on purpose. My job is easy. We work from home where users can call, email, chat us, and we fix their most basic computer problems, often resolved by a restart or redeployment of some sort. I took this job on purpose to get away from a very stressful career that killed my social life, and frankly, my will to live. This job cost me exactly zero energy, giving me the space and energy to have the social life I've always dreamed of. The pay in this job is based on the languages you provide help in, and because of my language skills and a promotion I'm not allowed to tell my colleagues about, I make more than anyone else in my team. For this simple reason, I refuse to take any promotions that bring more stress but are not financially compensated, causing me to have worked in first line for 3.5 years now, while most of my colleagues have had promotions. Because this company has a huge turnover, I often get new colleagues and managers. I usually train the new colleagues and have a friendly, cordial relationship with the managers, but I always try to stay private and reserved as much as possible to save all my energy for after-work activities. Most days I don't talk to anyone. I log in, I work on the tickets, calls, emails for 50% of the time, while studying, reading, watching movies, or listening to music the rest of the time. What's important to know for this story is that we can get a bonus of up to 10% of our monthly income depending on our productivity. I always get the 10%, but for some newer colleagues it's difficult because the limits are pretty high. If I like a colleague, I will sometimes help them by closing tickets in their name. I also usually take the more challenging tickets and leave the easier ones for the newer team members. Further bit of information is that the company I work for has their help desk for 12 languages. So to cover all the languages, we have a team of 8. So now to the malicious compliance. One of the people I trained became the new team leader, which I actually encouraged. The guy is exactly the manager type and understands the job. Unfortunately, the pressure from the operations manager got to him and he started checking our stats, noticing that for about 4 hours per day, there is no activity from me. I explained to him that this is on purpose to give everyone a chance to get their bonus and that my output is still higher than anyone else in the team. He also noticed that I sometimes close tickets in my colleagues' names, for which I couldn't give him the real reason cause it's sort of fraud. I just told him I rush sometimes and just don't notice. He told me no more relaxing times and no more closing tickets in others' names. He actually said he would be checking up on me to make sure I work the full 8 hours I'm paid for. I explained to him that this was a very bad idea, that the team is doing really well and the current status quo is perfectly balanced and he shouldn't upset it. But he was young and reckless. Fine. For the next 2 months, I worked at full capacity, where normally there was a good balance of closing tickets and everyone getting a fair shot at their bonus. Now, all of a sudden, I did about 70% of the work, leaving very little for my colleagues who, except for one other, both months didn't qualify for their bonuses, causing huge conflicts in the team. I tried to stay out of it but was soon accused of stealing all my colleagues' tickets and not giving them a chance to earn their bonuses. I replied professionally to all the accusations via email, making sure to CC all relevant managers, including the operations manager. After the 2 months, our new team leader was reassigned and the status quo returned as it was. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Iced Maggot. Ew. Being a manager when there is a well-oiled team without any performance issues already in place is literally the easiest job in the whole world. You do nothing. Upsetting that balance is literally the worst thing you can do. Another user called Nighthawk something responded to this one and said, "You talk to people and say, tell me what you need from me to make sure that you keep doing your job the way you've been doing it. That's it." Yeah, unfortunately this doesn't happen a lot, especially when it's a new manager coming in who wants to make all the right moves, that's definitely in quotations, to impress their higher-ups because they're the new manager and they know what's best. It takes a really special kind of person to look at everything that's going on and say, wow, this is actually working really well, and all I need to do here is keep the machine oiled so that it keeps doing what it's doing. I can sit back and let the team do what it does, which is work very well together. This next story comes to us from MEHC011. Cost of $40 per month is too expensive for the accounts team. Let's jump right in. My work involves analyzing all kinds of data. This instance occurred around the time when our company was somewhat new, but still large enough to have 150 employees and rapidly growing. So far, our data analysis had been retail companies, travel agencies, or even the housing market. For the first time, we received a request to analyze health data from 5 hospitals in our area. The health data is very sensitive, so the raw data itself and the analytical result could not be shared via email or Dropbox. For the first time, my team gets to see that sensitive companies go through channels that have a lot of security to share the data between us and the client. These channels cost money, but nothing too expensive which our organization couldn't afford, something like $40 per month. 4 out of the 5 hospitals have this data sharing channel, which meant that my team was able to receive the raw data and also be able to provide the analysis via the same channel. The 5th hospital was new and they did not have this channel. Either our company or the 5th hospital needed to have this channel. So I raise a request with the accounts team to purchase this channel and it is denied. Myself and my manager both raise it again and also discuss it with the account supervisor, and it is approved verbally, but declined on the system once again after 2 weeks. We try again for the third time after discussing with the higher accounts manager, and still no approval at the end to buy this channel. It is declined, and we have been told it is the hospital's responsibility to share the data. And if we reach the hospital, they ask us to reach the health ministry, which then asks us to get in touch with a local member of parliament, etc. So just a lot of bureaucracy that I shouldn't be managing. While this entire request of data sharing is being worked on, the time for us to receive and analyze this data is running out. We are waiting only on a single hospital's data, which is ready to be sent to us, but only via an appropriate channel. So I've had enough. I find out from the health ministry email response while working on getting the hospital to buy the data sharing system that the data can also be shared practically. Specifically, if I was to take a USB with me to get the data physically at the hospital and also return the output to the hospital the same way, this practical data sharing capability is deemed entirely safe. And that's what I started to do. Every Monday, I drive 30 minutes to the hospital at 11 a.m., go to their admin team to retrieve the data in my USB, and then drive back to my work, reaching at 1 p.m. Then I go have lunch at 1 p.m. I repeat this same task again with our analytical output on Thursday. Our contract is to analyze the health data for the whole year. After doing this for 3 weeks, one of the upper management people, whose office is opposite my desk, starts to think that I've been taking a very long time for lunch, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. He comes to my desk and asks if everything is okay and why I was away from my desk for 4 hours. I tell him the whole story. He is not happy at all. The cost of that data sharing system is nothing compared to the cost of paying my salary while I physically collect the data every single time. He puts the accounts team into their place by finding out that they approve of this system verbally each time and then deny it every time after a few weeks. And literally that day, we have this system all purchased and then installed overnight. Although I do miss the bi-weekly travel while listening to music to only do a copy-paste of files into and out of a USB drive. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called P0D0. It says, "I'm still stuck on the part where the secure alternative is letting you show up and plug up your own USB into the hospital computer." OP responded to this one and said, "The USB stick belongs to the hospital. Because of the work we needed to do, they allowed a single person from our team to use the USB stick. I had to provide appropriate ID and sign their document to use the USB, and return it once I no longer need it. And the USB return part was hilarious because they have set days once every few months where all external people who have hospital items but no longer need them must physically show up to return. We confirm that we are returning the item by signing another document. Items like medical equipment is sent to the cleaning room, and the USB stick which I returned was broken with a hammer." I'm still kinda stuck on that one myself, regardless of what their procedures were after they got the USB sticks back. I mean, once OP leaves there with that USB stick, they're responsible for all that data. That's a huge burden on OP, especially if they happen to lose that USB for any reason. Could you imagine? I'm really surprised the hospital let that data leave on something mobile like that. But let's get back to the part where they smash it with a hammer, because you might be surprised how hard it is to destroy electronic devices. On a USB stick, that information is stored on a very little silicon chip, and you need to destroy that chip completely, like burning it, incinerating it, whatever, but a hammer will not do that. Some of that data will still be recoverable, and I'm amazed that using a hammer is their solution at a brand new hospital. That is dumb. Our next story today comes to us from Obsidian Winter. Don't deviate from the flowchart? Okay, if you insist. Let's jump right in. About a decade ago, I had the misfortune of working in a call center for a company which provided phone, broadband, and satellite TV channels. This was the days before fiber, so the setup was slightly different from what you see these days. To begin with, I worked in customer services doing things like booking pay-per-views, changing billing dates, and upgrading packages. After a year or so, the powers that be decided the whole call center would be trained on phone and broadband tech support, and we would take those calls instead. Lots of people complained because they weren't technically minded and found the idea of fixing tech issues daunting. I was not worried because I was a massive nerd and was building my own computers from age 12. My dad started teaching me when I was about 8. This new type of call sounded much more interesting and I was looking forward to it. The staff were told, "Don't worry, we will train you, it's simple really." To be fair to them, they were right, kind of. For those who don't know, the original internet connection dial-up was an issue because the phone line was totally used up by the internet connection, meaning you couldn't make calls at the same time as using your glacier-like connection. Broadband revolutionized this system because it allowed both phone and internet to be used at the same time, and it improved the connection speed to allow for more data to be transferred. Think of dial-up as a country road, slow speeds, and only one kind of traffic at a time, or you end up with a massive queue of cars, lorries, and tractors clogging the road with no filtering space for motorbikes. Broadband is the equivalent of a dual carriageway. 2 lanes of traffic in each direction means you can get more traffic into your city at higher speeds. The issue with more traffic is that you need to add more road signs to direct it to the correct destination. Phone signals to the phone, broadband signals to the router. To do this, you need to have a microfilter as the first thing plugged in to every single phone port in use in the house. The TV installation, which happened first, did not include a microfilter, and customers would assume the TV installation wouldn't need to be messed with, so they didn't add one when they set up their router. The number one complaint on the tech support line was caused by that filter being missing. It resulted in slow or intermittent broadband connections and static on phone lines and drop calls. People would phone up and scream at me because the connection was fine to start with, but the phone line has always been bad, and now the connection keeps dropping. As I mentioned, most of the staff were upset at being moved from a customer service role to a tech role, so the higher-ups had a troubleshooting system created. It was basically a glorified flowchart with a pretty interface. The issue is that whoever created it didn't think it through. No matter where the problem was with the tech issue, the chances were that the customer would need to be calling on a mobile phone so that the right steps could be followed. Most customers did not call on mobiles because in those days, calls from mobile phones were expensive. Even calls to landlines, and especially calls to 0845 numbers like call centers. This information was missing from the flowchart, and it meant that if the customer tried to change the way their equipment was connected, or if we ran a line test, it would result in the call dropping because they were disconnecting their landline handset, or we were stopping all signals down the line for a couple of minutes to do the test. It was assumed that we would call our customer back if this happened, because it was impressed into us that the point was to resolve the tech issue. If the customer has to keep calling back and speaking to different people, then it slowed this process down. The flowchart did not say, "Call your customer back." The thing with me being kind of techie was that I could usually identify the fault in the first minute of the call based on the symptoms described by the customer, and I seem to have a knack for being able to explain tech issues using accessible language, so the customer understands what is happening without feeling condescended to. This meant that my calls were shorter, more efficient, and my customer satisfaction survey results, CSATs, were high. What's not to like? Well, you know how I mentioned that the powers that be decided to take non-techie people and put them in a tech role? It went about as well as you would expect. The flowchart worked to a point, but people who had no tech knowledge tried to cut corners, and it resulted in problems. Free replacement routers were issued for external line fault problems, which is like replacing the roundabout on an interchange when the problem is a tree on the road 10 miles from there. Engineers were sent to resolve external faults caused by dead master phone sockets, about as useful as doing roadworks the next town over in an attempt to get more traffic through a flooded slip road at your town's boundary. Repeat calls were up, resolutions were down, customer satisfaction was low for the call center as a whole. There were about 20 of us who were doing well because, of course, I wasn't the only nerd in the call center. We used our common sense and tech know-how to get results, and my team of about 15 was around 50% tech nerd. Our manager loved it because we had the best results of the whole call center, and she looked amazing, despite being a Luddite herself. Head office kept trying to get the rest of the call center up to our level. They couldn't figure out why people hired to be glorified phone concierges couldn't fix the phone lines. Obviously, the problem must be the staff. Word was issued from on high, "Thou shalt not deviate from the flowchart." I foolishly thought that they only meant the people with CSATs which were through the floor. I thought the people who knew what we were talking about would be left to it. Slowly but surely, the rest of the call center scores started climbing out of the toilet. Our team was still constantly the highest, but the gap wasn't so embarrassingly massive anymore. Others were resisting using the flowchart. People at the peak of Mount Stupid on the Dunning-Kruger graph fought the idea that they didn't know enough to act without the dubious support of the admittedly quite bad flowchart. Upper management started thinking of ways to make them use it. A new score was added to our stats: adherence to process. Quality control started failing our work if we deviated from the flowchart. My manager started writing me and the others up for it. We tried to explain that the flowchart worked for the people who didn't know how computers actually worked because it methodically went through every possibility over the course of about an hour and a half. If you don't know where the fault is, then eventually you will stumble over the right fix. But when you have some knowledge and can tell within the first 5 seconds that Mr. Smith has accidentally turned off his wireless card, surely it's better customer service to jump right to that? Apparently not. She said that if we deviated from the flowchart again, she would start the disciplinary process, which always and without exception resulted in the person being fired sooner or later. Okay then, no more using our brains. All of us stopped using our prior knowledge to fix the faults quickly. I stopped explaining the issues to the clients. We literally just read the flowchart instructions in all their mind-numbing and typoed glory. I also stopped calling customers back when the line dropped due to flaws in the flowchart. Every time this happened, I would leave a note on the client's profile: line dropped when doing X test. I have been told to never deviate from the flowchart or I will be taken to disciplinary stage. There is no instruction to say I can call my customer back, so I didn't. If customer calls back in, test result was Y. One of my colleagues delighted in telling his customers, "Yes, I know exactly what the problem is and it will only take 5 minutes to fix, but first I'm required to do these other tests. It will take about 40 minutes to get to the point where I am allowed to fix your issue." Why? Well, manager has threatened me with unemployment if I use my brain. So I have to go down the list here and it will take 40 minutes to get to the one that I know will resolve your problem. Suddenly, our team was at the bottom of the CSAT board. Our repeat calls were through the roof. We were the worst performing team in the call center. Our manager was being questioned by upper management about why our scores had plummeted. The head office was going to take us off tech and put us onto debt management lines if we didn't start getting our score back up to where it was. Obviously, that didn't happen. Most of the techie people left the business. I stuck it out long enough to see the tech role removed and the debt lines instated. Just before I started my new job with my current employer, head office sent out their annual feedback survey. I ripped them a new one in brutal feedback. From the micromanaging to inappropriate staff roles for the people hired, to predatory upselling to vulnerable customers and unethical debt management practices. I heard that some of the managers were fired, so it seems other people spoke out too. And there were some top-down changes which fixed some of the superficial issues. Oh, and that terrible flowchart, they prettied it up, added the fiber options, and put it on their website so that people with mobile data can fix their own broadband issues. At least they got rid of the typos first. This is one of those stories where you can really tell that OP works in the job that they're talking about, because they were very good at taking all of these technological things that were happening and dumbing them down for the readers like me who may not understand all that techie stuff. Also, most of you know that I've worked in many different jobs and, well, 8 of them happen to be different call centers. And I can tell you that what OP is describing here, unfortunately, isn't just something that happens in the call center that they worked in. It happens in a lot of them. Usually, one hand doesn't know what the other one's doing. You know, sometime I need to write the story about how my whole team was fired from the call center for doing something that our team lead told us to do, over and over and over again, and was backed up by the site director as well. Yeah, we were all walked out, including the team lead and the site director, but that's a story for another day. Our next story today comes to us from a deleted account. Karen Boss desperately needed my uniform back the next day. No excuses. Let's jump right in. Okay, so a little backstory first. I am a 20-year-old college student full-time and doing 23 plus hours a week on top of classes to make ends meet. I live paycheck to paycheck and have a car I am and was paying off. I used to work at McDonald's in my hometown, but since I moved to live on campus, which was 45 minutes away from my old job, and I wasn't willing to make the commute, so I decided to apply and got accepted to a small sandwich shop 10 minutes from my college, which was a blessing. It started out great, plenty of hours, easy work, fast days, till the old manager decided to switch stores. The new manager was one of the biggest Karens you have ever met. Like bad, and when I say bad, I really mean it. She completely changed the procedures and made things so much worse. And when I'd have to stay over, sometimes 2 to 3 hours after closing, she'd burst in the next day yelling and screaming at the top of her lungs, "Stop staying later, you have to be out by 8:30, we won't pay you for any time past then." I had no choice, because the list she gave me to do to close the store alone every night, may I add, was extremely time consuming, especially with no help. I was expected to stop serving at 8 and do 5 people's worth of work in 30 minutes. It simply wasn't doable. Hearing I wasn't going to be paid for time I worked, time I spent making sure everything was done on the list before I left, otherwise I'd be fired for not doing all of it, would go unpaid, as well as I'd be fired if I stayed longer than 8:30. There was no winning. On top of that, the moment management switched, they decided they were giving people too many hours and cut me to only 3 hours a week. That went on for 4 weeks till I decided enough was enough. $45 work weeks wasn't even worth putting in the time and effort to even show up. So on one of my weekends, I was with my parents off campus. I was due to work that day. 3 hours, of course, my only day that week. I was shopping near said sandwich shop. It's located inside a Walmart. My mom and I were discussing for the last week how I should just quit, since it seems they're trying to fire me without saying they're firing me, and wanting me to leave on my own so they wouldn't need to fill out paperwork. Right then and there, I decided, know what? F this job, and F my entitled Karen boss. I sent her a text that I quit on the spot, and to not expect me to come in that night for my shift. She texts me back ranting about how, since I'm not giving her a 2-week notice, I'll never be able to work at one of those sandwich shops again. At that point, I didn't care. I already had to give up my brand new car of only 4 months because I couldn't pay my loan and insurance. It was a nice car too, a white shimmery 2016 Hyundai Sonata. I love that thing. I told her at some point that week I'd try to get the brand new uniform that, funnily enough, they had just gave to me the week prior, a whole 3.5 months after I started working there. But I warned her my classes run till right before closing, and I didn't know when I'd be able to do so. She texts back in what I could only imagine was the snarkiest tone possible. "No, I really need that uniform back tomorrow." I told her I'm sorry, but that may not be possible due to my school schedule, and I'm not willing to ditch a class to drop off a few pieces of clothing. She said, "No, you'll bring it back tomorrow. Don't even try to lie to me. You were seen in store the day you quit. No excuses." Okay then, she said no excuses. I didn't want to go into an argument with her over it, and knowing she herself would be closing that day, and my classes ended at 8 exactly, I happily complied. I made sure I'd arrive right as she was closing the lock on the gate. I was bringing the clothes in my reusable shopping bag. I had no throwaway bags, and since she can't take and claim my bag as her own, I was just going to give her the clothes one piece at a time. Knowing she would have to carry them out of the store, juggling them back home made me happy. When it came time to deliver my uniform to her, all the stars seemed to align perfectly. I arrived at 8:30, caught her on the way out with the outfit not even in a reusable bag to begin with. As a touch of sweet, unplanned irony, it was raining outside. Hard rain. The sidewalks I guess were extra slippery and muddy, cause on my way in I slipped and landed chest first into the mud. I was mostly spared though, because the clothes were there to break my fall and absorb most of the filth. Dropping off the muddy, loose clothes, seeing her reaction, watching her stomp her feet, wrench in disgust, holding the clothes 10 feet away from her body, huff and puff, marching out of the store in pure shock and disbelief. She didn't even have words for me. It was the sweetest revenge I had ever seen. This did mean I had to buy a whole new set of clothes and change in the Walmart bathroom, but it was all worth it to see her reaction in the end. After I had returned to my dorm that evening, I sent her a text saying simply, "Enjoy," and blocked her number. Safe to say, karma really did pay out on my end. A bunch of people in the comment section for this one made sure that OP knew that this seemed like a constructive dismissal case because they were cut down to 3 hours a week. They were trying to get OP to quit, that's for certain. Being cut down to 3 hours a week probably opens you up to being approved for EI as well, so that's something that OP should probably look into. Another thing I hope that OP takes away from this experience is that you can report a lot of things. You don't just sit back and take it. We have labor laws for a reason, and you can use them against terrible employers like this. Our next story today comes to us from Zane the Raptor. Doing my job. Let's jump right in. Okay, I am really quite terrible at recounts, so I will try to keep this quite brief. Basically, I was working casually for a pizza chain, the one that you can't out pizza, and I had to call out for a shift to go to the hospital as I was the victim of some domestic issue and injured my arm. The managers were fine with it, although out of the 4 I spoke to, none of them asked if I was okay, but that's a different matter. I went to the hospital and the doctor looked at it and just put a band-aid over the wounds on my arm and said not to do any heavy lifting and use my arm as little as possible for a couple of days. I questioned whether he could just glue the wound or stitch it, but he refused. I have no idea why. It 100% needed to be glued, and my regular doctor said as much, the same, when I showed the injuries to him nearly 2 weeks later, as they still hadn't healed. But after I got to my house from the hospital, I rang my store manager and told him I would only be able to do light duties for a couple of weeks, knowing the doctor at the hospital was wrong, and he said that was not a problem and that he appreciated that I was still willing to work. Anyways, I went back to work 2 days after the injuries occurred. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have been going to work, but I needed money and wasn't going to have any otherwise. As soon as I got there, the manager, not the store manager, let's call them Tammy, told me I would be on dispatch, cutting and boxing all the pizzas and sides. I apologized and explained I wouldn't be able to do that as the pans can get quite heavy, and the doctor had asked me not to use that arm. I also showed her the bandage I had wrapped my arm in. Tammy asked why I even came to work then, and I explained that I had told the store manager about my circumstances, and they had been happy for me to do light duties. Tammy rolled her eyes and told me to answer the phones and serve customers instead, which I was happy to do. We got quite busy and dishes started piling up, and Tammy told me to get on wash up. I reminded her of my arm and suggested it probably wasn't a good idea to put a fresh wound that was still bleeding slightly in water that was being used to clean dishes. Tammy rolled her eyes and said she was going to the office and she would be back in 20 minutes, and that I had better have all the dishes done and put them away. I tried to explain that I wouldn't be able to lift the fresh out of the oven pans into the sink to wash, but she ignored me and said my arm couldn't be that bad, or the doctor would have glued the wound or given me stitches, and that she wanted the work done. Cue the malicious compliance. I started doing the dishes and was very careful to only lift an amount that I could handle with one hand, despite it not being very safe. 10 minutes later, Tammy yelled out that I wasn't moving fast enough and that I needed to use 2 hands, so I lifted up a larger pile that I could usually carry quite easily with 2 hands, but in this case, my arm went numb and I dropped them, and in reflex tried to catch them, which completely busted the wounds open and blood started dripping everywhere. I quickly bandaged my arm again and cleaned up the blood, but one of the customers had started yelling that I needed help. Tammy came and told me to move out of her way. She then spent the rest of the night cleaning the dishes as the store manager had checked the cameras and seen me doing the dishes and told her they needed to be redone with clean water. And I continued doing the light duties I'd been assigned, aside from a number of admin tasks that I normally did, which she for some reason refused to allow me to do. I found out later Tammy didn't go home until 1 a.m. and kept 2 other staff there to help her when we closed at 10 because she wasn't able to get her work, plus the work she refused to let me do, done on time. Sorry if this is poorly written or doesn't sound like the typical malicious compliance. I promise it was. I'm just really bad at recounts. Now, I do want to mention that right at the beginning of the story, OP mentioned that they went to the hospital because of a domestic issue. They were asked in the comments down below if they were okay and in a safe place now, and they responded that yes, it was a bit of a journey, but they are safe now. Going back to the part about the store manager here, I know they were okay with OP coming in to do light duties, even if the manager that was on duty wasn't, but you'd think that the store manager would have brought on another person at that time, scheduled another person to be there as well, knowing that OP wasn't going to be able to fully do their job. So it seems to me like there was a bit of an issue as far as the management is concerned, where they weren't prepared for this issue with OP, even though OP gave them plenty of notice. But also, Tammy spent her time in the office and didn't really come out and help either, so maybe the store manager was thinking that Tammy would pick up the slack. I guess they were wrong. Our next story today comes to us from Wild Butterscotch 977. Oh, my paper isn't long enough? Okay, let's jump right in. Another post reminded me of my own little bit of malicious compliance back in college. This was more than a decade ago. So in my junior year, I was taking an art history class on medieval art and architecture. Partway through the course, the professor assigned a paper, and the instructions were that the paper length was to be 5 to 9 pages. I wrote my paper and it ended up being 5 pages. I said everything I felt was necessary to say in that amount of pages. When I got the paper back, I received an A-. Now, I'm not usually the type to complain about an A-, but in this case, I knew I wrote a strong paper. I was an art history major, and at this point was 3 years into my program. So I had a buttload of art history classes under my belt, and I effing knew when I produced a good art history paper. So I really wanted to hear why I got the minus instead of a straight A. I went to the professor's office hours to ask why he graded it as such. Yes, he was quite amused someone was complaining about an A-. I didn't give an F. I wanted to know why he took off points and what he thought could have been improved. He hemmed and hawed for a few minutes because there wasn't anything wrong with my paper, and finally he said, well, it could have been longer. I said, the prompt said 5 to 9 pages, and I was within that range. He replied, it could have been longer. Okay, fine. Next paper that came around was the term research paper, and this time the prompt said at least 15 pages. Cue malicious compliance. I worked my butt off writing this research paper, and out of pure spite, I made this dude read no less than 29 effing pages about some stupid medieval church. Now, I had written papers this long before, and a year later when I wrote my honors thesis, it was nearly 4 times that length. But for this particular topic, I was really stretching it. The verbosity was a bit ridiculous. A week or 2 later, he returned the paper A+ grade. He handed it to me and said with a genuine smile, it was great, I loved it. You should submit it for publication to a history journal. I begrudgingly submitted my maliciously compliant paper to the journal, and it was accepted and published. Admittedly, I was probably the one that suffered the most from my own malicious compliance, but I didn't care, and I'd do it again. Wow, malicious compliance that turns into a publishing credit that you can put on your CV? That worked out in your favor. This story actually reminds me of way back when I first met my wife. We were both working in a call center, and she was the quality lead who was sitting with me for a call. I didn't like selling on the phone, and she kept pushing to me that I needed to sell to this customer. So I very sarcastically decided to mention it to the customer, and they bought it. So yeah. This next story comes to us from Bubbly Kitty 2425. My dad's cousin's ex. Let's jump right in. I was told this would be good here. Let me tell you a story. My dad's cousin, she's in her late 70s, early 80s. Well, she was married to a super high up of some big company. They had 2 kids, but had a wonderful prenup, and it was ironclad. Where if they got divorced, she got nothing but what was acquired during marriage, and he paid child support. If she cheated, she forfeits everything but child support. If he cheated, he had to pay her alimony and child support until she got remarried. No matter what she made, it was set that she got $5,000 a month alimony. After the kids were 18, her alimony went down to $2,500 if she still was unmarried. The man was loaded. Well, he cheated and she got proof. Actually, his boss caught him and liked her, so he told her, even testified to it. Plus, he didn't deny it in court. He was having an affair with his young secretary. So she got alimony and child support. Well, years later, after she finished cosmetology school, she ended up opening her own hair salon in the South. She has a lot of customers in those upscaled assisted living facilities, so now she's also loaded. She drives a super cute red convertible Mercedes. Well, they divorced when she was 30. She still has never remarried. He's still paying alimony. She has a serious boyfriend for 30 years, but she said just to spite the ex, she will not remarry unless he dies. So he has been married 4 more times, but no matter what, because of his prenup, he insisted on, she still gets that $2,500 a month. Well, for at least 40 to 45 years so far, he's been paying. She said after what he did to her, making her give up her dreams and sign a prenup, she was going to make him pay. She did eventually go finish school and follow her dreams after the kids were grown. She's the nicest person too. His other wives got nowhere near that. He made sure his prenup granted them nothing but child support. Also, her boyfriend and her don't live together. They have been neighbors for years. They both want their own space. He also has his own money. She doesn't even need her ex's money and just puts it in an account for her grandkids' colleges. She also likes to donate some to a women's shelter. She donates it in his name, so he gets notifications or notes that money was donated in his name. She says the day he dies, she and her boyfriend will go to the courthouse. Everyone in the family knows, and every time we see her, my father laughs and says, "So the ex still alive and paying?" Wait a minute. If that's a registered charity and she's making the donations in his name, isn't he able to claim a receipt for those and then have it taken off of his taxes? I mean, I'm pretty sure that's how it works where I live, but I'm not sure about where OP lives. If that's the case, OP might want to think about stopping doing that because they're not actually hurting him, they're actually helping him out. Because some of that money that he has to give her on a monthly basis, he's just able to write it off on his taxes. Our next story today comes to us from Diligent Cockroach 700. No pass, no entry. Let's jump right in. This happened quite a few years ago. I started a new job in IT support. After a couple of weeks training and orientation, I was put on my first early shift. IT support were always the first in the building to make sure all the systems were good before the working day started. So I was given my own key to the front door to unlock the building. The entrance had a kind of airlock system. The outer door was unlocked, but then there was another automatic door that needed a swipe card to open it. Everything was fine for the first few days, entered the building, got on with my work. Then, this particular morning, as I unlocked the door, the head of HR walked up behind me. I recognized him as he had sat in on my job interview. I said, "Good morning," swiped my card, and walked in. He followed me. As soon as we were in the building, he pulled me up and told me I shouldn't have let him in without him swiping his pass. His argument was that he might have been fired the day before, so might have been trespassing. The swipe card system was not used to monitor people's work hours or anything like that. I apologized profusely, and he said he'd let it go this time as I was new. Fast forward 2 weeks, I'm unlocking the door and a complete stranger walks up behind me and tried to follow me in. I turn around and ask him to use his pass. He says he has forgotten it. I say then I can't let you in. Then he drops the bombshell. "But I'm the CEO. I apologize and say, "Sorry, I only have your word for that, and I'm under strict instructions from the head of HR not to let anybody in without a pass on pain of disciplinary action." He got quite angry and said again he was the CEO. Later that day, I got a phone call from the head of HR. I thought he was going to bullock me, but instead, he said that I did the right thing and he was going to get the CEO to apologize to me. I did get a short email from the CEO to that effect later in the day. Yeah, OP, even if you knew who the CEO was and you'd been working there for a very long time, I think you could have gotten yourself in some deep doo-doo by letting them into the building. Your HR person was completely right in saying that, well, you don't know if they got fired the day before or not, and you could be letting in somebody who's coming in to make a big fuss or damage things or people, who knows. I mean, that CEO could have even been in cahoots with the HR person, and it could have been a test for you anyway, so that's another thing you gotta think about. This next story comes to us from Hooked on, adult phone stuff. Yeah. Micromanaging 101. Let's jump right in. I am an amused bystander to this. I was working on a compliance project at the time. The practice had once consisted of a single compliance officer, but the company had grown and responsibilities had been split up into multiple departments. The person who had once run the entire practice alone was having a hard time handing off responsibilities to the newly created departments and would find petty ways to claw back control at any time. This person would also panic about investigations that could prove that previous work had not been done consistently, so would revise procedures, definitions, department requirements, etc. to suit whatever agenda happened to be at play. Sometimes this meant ignoring important things. Sometimes this meant filing unnecessary reports. Things changed on a weekly basis. For some unfathomable reason, this person was very concerned about in-person coverage. The entire department had worked remotely throughout COVID. All other departments continued to work remotely. This department had to be in the office, period. To make things worse, working hours were defined as 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with a 1-hour break. On multiple occasions, this person would complain, claiming someone had mentioned that the department was deserted before 5 p.m. on Fridays, the day before holidays, etc. Didn't matter that staff was working around 60 hours. Also didn't matter that there was nobody there to complain, as this was the only department on site. There were duties which occasionally required someone to be on call until 6 or 7 p.m. On-call staffers suggested that the person responsible could start late on those days, but no, the workday starts at 8 a.m., no exceptions. The 2 hourly staffers took 2 to 3 hour lunch breaks so that they could still cover the required 8 a.m. start date, be available until 7 p.m., and still meet their no overtime requirements. The salary exempt staff wasn't having any of it though. Calls were no longer answered because staff was to work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., and there was to be no flexibility regarding attendance. Staff got tired of this and mutually agreed to give this person exactly what they asked for. They started sending group texts of their work lock screens showing that they were at their desks at 8 a.m. They'd send texts showing that their computers had been locked at 5:01 p.m. I was briefly on this text chain and had to mute it due to the barrage of daily petty texts. The individual in question intended to mean that staff had to be there at least between those hours. Unpaid OT was totally reasonable, but there was to be no concession made to allow staff some flexibility in the way they split up their working hours. That couldn't be said for obvious reasons, so they harped on the 5 p.m. minimum end to workdays. As you can imagine, this was followed by a wave of resignations. Over a 6-month period, the department collapsed, leaving them with less staff than they had before the expansion. Great for us. We ended up winning a lucrative contract to manage and rebuild their entire practice. The staffer responsible for this great resignation was found to be incompetent after their work started to get reviewed independently. The sheer volume of missed issues became impossible to justify, and this person was eventually quietly replaced. A lot of companies over the course of COVID were forced to have their employees work from home, and then they realized, wow, we can actually do this and maybe save some money by not needing all the lights on in this big building we have to house all these people. But then there's always the ones that are stuck in the old times, and they don't think that anybody could work from home and be productive, that we all need to be stuck in one place together so we can all be watched over closely. Yeah, times are changing, bud. Get with it. Our next story today comes to us from A Horse Has No Name. Start using icebreakers to talk to customers to get them to buy stuff? You got it. Let's jump right in. This story is over a decade old, back when I was fresh out of college and dedicated to doing nothing important for as long as possible. I worked for an electronics store, a big one, and I lasted there for about 18 months before I realized I was wasting my time on garbage pay that I ended up blowing on games and movies. My manager, Bob, but not really, was a pretty decent guy, and I never had too many complaints about him, although he was wasted at that particular store because he was a pretty good manager. I could tell he was getting a lot of flack from the GM, Jim, but not really, because home theater, me, sales were stagnant, clarification good but not growing, and not hitting our ridiculous quotas. I worked in the mornings until afternoons when there were maybe 10 people visiting the department in total, and you could tell that 8 of them were just watching TV, waiting for their spouse's cell phone plan to be activated. Unfortunately, since there was so little foot traffic, management's decision was to drill into us how to use every marketing and customer manipulation tactic to encourage people to buy things. I was a good salesperson, and I could sell the crap out of home theater using tactics such as getting customers to use their imagination about their options, or presenting new options in ways they hadn't considered. I listened. I learned about their needs and what they were looking for, and they frequently left the store with something completely different than what they thought they needed. I recall that the number of returns I had was so small that I could probably count them on both hands over 18 months. I, however, was completely effing disinterested in marketing tactics, sales tactics, or manipulating customers for upsells. This meant upselling or changing how I communicated with them to speak their language in a way that marketing showed increased sales, but was blatantly manipulative. F that. So when Jim tells Bob about their new push to encourage customers to buy things they normally wouldn't buy, he knows I'm going to be a challenge, but he does a pretty good job at trying to convince me. He comes to me and we have a floor meeting, and he asks me to try breaking the ice with the customers by chatting them up a little about topics unrelated to their viewing habits, home theater, etc., to get them to like me enough to want to make a purchase. Malicious compliance time. I was ready to quit and move on, and I was no longer interested in playing the game. He wanted me to try breaking the ice with people, so I started flirting with all the customers. Black, white, guy, girl, rich, not rich, old, not old. Everyone got a smile and a compliment about their outfit, and I'd compare them to a celebrity they reminded me of if possible. I was good at it too. I kept completely mild and inoffensive, our uniforms were blah, and I wasn't really trying, but on more than one occasion, a bored older woman or housewife gave me their phone number. Our overall numbers started going down because I was busy chatting with customers than making sales. So eventually, I got hit with a secret shopper and the jig was up. Bob finds out about this from Jim, and I can hear him laughing from across the store before coming to my department to ask me to go to the back of the store for a private meeting. He wrote me up for inappropriate communications with customers. I told him I wouldn't sign the write-up report because I received no directives saying I couldn't flirt with customers. I wasn't violating the employee handbook, I made sure, and I never said anything that was offensive or sexual, even though several customers took it in that direction. But more importantly, I was given my 2 weeks notice, but if the write-up was a deal breaker, I could leave now. Bob was sad that I was leaving but understood. Jim was pissed that I was leaving because I was a good earner, even though the department goals were ridiculous. There's not a lesson from this for managers out there, so don't read into it. I was an acerbic jackbutt. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Series Hybrid. It says, Management 101. Set impossible goals so those lazy bees try harder. Set your employees up to fail so they feel bad about failing to meet your impossible goals. Never admit that anything is management's fault. Always flip it so any problems are somehow the employee's fault. Sit back and watch all that sweet money flow in. Gee, this reminds me of a former manager of mine who thought that everything he did was the way it was supposed to be and there was no other ways. In fact, I don't think we were even allowed to think. I haven't said this for a very long time in any of the KCC videos, but screw you, Rick. Getting back to this story and management in general, I think that there's a problem because if they're not actually on the front lines working with the customers every day, then they really can't know what to do to make those sales better. You really need to get your staff and find out what's working for them. Bring them together, have a town hall meeting, find out what's working for them and implement their strategies. Because if you're not the one out there selling to the customer, how do you know what's going to work? Our next story today comes to us from Outlandishness1681. As you wish, let's jump right in. This happened a couple or 3 decades ago in the military. I was in charge of the squadron budget and made sure all unit expenditures were proper, right funds account, and funds were available. I was also to make sure that our budget lasted the whole fiscal year. We got a new commander who was the worst micromanager I saw in my 20-year career. I made an appointment for my initial budget brief and proceeded to lay out our current expenditures, funding available, and the plans to spend it all by the end of the fiscal year. My new commander then tells me that he wants oversight on every penny spent in the squadron. I said I could do that, but I needed some clarification. He said very condescendingly, "Did you not hear me, Sergeant? I said every penny. I will approve every penny spent in this squadron before it is spent." I said, "Yes, sir. Do you want me to send paper requests or email them to you?" He said email would be sufficient and dismissed me. I knew exactly what to do. I called all the bosses who ran the different shops and told them what the commander had said and that I had no choice but to comply. None of them were happy, and a couple of them caught the tone in my voice and figured out what I was doing. I even told the squadron chief what was going to happen, and he told me that he would have my back. So I took all 27 spending accounts down to $0 available. Even the most critical aircraft parts couldn't be ordered until they sent me an email, which I forwarded to the commander. He never once responded. It took 2 weeks for everything to hit the fan. It was longer than I thought it would take, and I was starting to get nervous. We were in a staff meeting, and the commander was pissed. He had just gotten his butt chewed by the colonel because of all the broke airplanes waiting on parts to be bought. He turned to the first flight chief and asked him why he had so much equipment that wasn't getting fixed. The chief said with a straight dead poker face, "Sergeant won't approve us buying any parts." The commander whipped his head toward me and angrily asked what the problem was. I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Sir, I sent those requests to you 2 weeks ago." You could see the color drain from his face as he quickly looked down. "We'll talk about this after the meeting." I kept my straight face, and I swear that I heard more than one muffled chuckle from the chiefs at the conference table. When the meeting was over, the commander told me to meet him in his office. The chief that threw me under the bus winked at me and smiled. I walked in right behind the boss and reported formally. We normally only do this if we were in trouble or getting praise, but this guy insisted on it from everyone every time. "Mike," apparently I was now on a first name basis, "you seem to have a pretty firm grasp on the budget and what the flights need. I think you can approve the normal day-to-day stuff and just bring the big things to me." "Yes, sir," was all I could say without busting out in laughter. Every request was approved and ordered within an hour, and I was never questioned again. Now, OP added a little edit onto the end of the story. It says, "Postscript, Chief equals Chief Master Sergeant, the highest enlisted rank in the US Air Force." I found out later that the chiefs had all gotten together and decided to go along with my idea. They could have stopped it immediately, but decided to teach the commander a lesson. Somehow, the colonel that chewed my commander's butt had gotten word of what was going on and decided enough was enough, but he still didn't let on that he knew the real reason. Apparently, he thought my commander needed some education too. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Ogioni. It says, "Regardless of the branch, it's the NCOs who actually run things. A good officer learns this early in his career and knows that when a sergeant says, 'Are you sure you want to do that, sir?' that alarm should go off and he should seriously reconsider what he's doing." I think the same thing goes for management as it does in a military setting. All of the people that make the day-to-day decisions and do this day in and day out every single day of their working/military careers, which I guess is still a working career, they know exactly what they're doing for the most part. They might need a little bit of oversight, but fun fact, if you let them do their jobs, they'll do them better than you might think. Our next story today comes to us from Zigster23. Do you trust us? Let's jump right in. A little light on malicious compliance, but there were definite consequences. I've worked in IT at universities most of my career. Several years ago, I transferred to a new university to try something new. I immediately regretted it for several reasons. One, the entire department was under review from HR for low morale. A survey was sent to the staff to gauge morale. I learned later that the VP had been demoted because of it before I was hired. 2, the new director barely spoke to me when hired and had her door shut for almost 3 straight days. 3, I was asked to consider which of my staff I wanted to replace or fire to better help with the new software implementation. Later learned that they had several lawsuits for wrongful dismissal. 4, I had 2 staff that lived 90 minutes away that frequently asked to work from home during inclement weather. I was told to be strict about this and denied their requests. Of course, if my staff called or texted the director, she would cave and let them. Ugh. 5, my director received a promotion, executive director, and a consultant was hired as our new director. She was a consultant with the very company whose software we were implementing. Foreshadowing. Now comes the craziness. The VP brought in a group therapist to meet with all of the managers. We learned about team building and that a good team has a foundation of trust. We had several managerial meetings after this where our old director and the VP would grill the mid-level managers about trust. We were asked bluntly, who doesn't trust us? Everybody was afraid to speak up. My anxiety was now through the roof. I had to be put on medication just to help me get out the front door to go to work. I couldn't quit because I needed health insurance for my family, pre-Obamacare. Now comes the malicious compliance, not too malicious. They continued to berate us about how trust was key over several meetings. Who doesn't trust us? I finally raised my hand. You asked, so I'll answer you. I said, I don't trust you. I've been in meetings where you've belittled and made fun of our staff in front of vendors and clients. Who knows what is being said about me when I'm not in the room? You have unrealistic expectations and the lowest morale of any place I've worked. Trust needs to be earned. They were a bit shocked that I had answered them. I was fired within 2 weeks. I was well liked by my colleagues, which meant that whatever trust still was out there crumbled immediately. They replaced me with a consultant from the same software company. He was fired within a month. Trust was now completely abandoned. Within the year, 75% of my department either quit or retired. Thankfully, I had already started interviewing for positions before being fired. I found one within 2 months and have been there for 10 years. Best job I've ever had. Unfortunately, they're still up to the same shenanigans. Just recently, 10 plus years later, the university fired the whole IT division and outsourced them to the same software and consulting company. The whole university is in financial hot water, having to cut 14 academic programs. Yeah, the problem wasn't in the IT department, the problem was the organization of that place altogether. If they were having to cut 14 academic problems, well, the issues in that place go right up to the top, I can guarantee you that. OP, I'm glad you were able to get out, even if it was forced, and find a better job that you've been in for a very long time now. Congrats on that. Our next story today comes to us from Sad Day St. Pete. You want every single denied claim filled out as if it was approved? You got it. Let's jump right in. I worked as a claims adjuster for a few years that did claims on anything with wheels or propellers. Automotive, RV, motorcycle, ATV, boats, jet skis, we did it all. Doing automotive claims were our bread and butter, and easily documented in full because it's easy to find part numbers, prices, and labor times. Now, RVs on the other hand, they were a B. There weren't any industry standardized part numbers, several labor guides all having extremely vague and vastly different times for the same repair, etc. Everyone hated getting an RV claim because it took forever to gather all the info and enter it into the claim. Same goes for boats because we got one of those maybe twice a month. You would literally have to Google parts websites and attempt to find a similar part with a price close to what they were asking if it was going to be approved. One of the good things about the process was all of the contracts, regardless of vehicle, had very definitive reasons a claim would be denied. Example, covered under manufacturer warranty, listed as excluded in the contract, owner negligence, stuff like that. Whenever one of those came up, you thanked the old JC because you could just take down their estimate and deny it without verifying their estimate. Now, our VP, the highest manager in the building that actually reviewed our work, was the classic, I don't like to do the work, I just supervise type. Then it happened. One day, a denied claim, rightfully so, was elevated all the way up to him thanks to constant bitching by a Karen who was at a large dealership. The VP decided to approve it anyway, even though it was cut and dry, not covered. The problem? The adjuster didn't verify the parts and labor estimate before denying it, as it was about as clear as day it was to be denied. The VP had to spend, God forbid, 5 minutes verifying 2 parts and a labor time. He flew off the handle at this, and after the fact called a department-wide meeting stating that from now on, regardless of the claim, we had to verify every part and labor cost before denying. When asked why, he even said with a laugh that he didn't like to do work, but had to on that claim, so now it is on us. Did I mention the job was ran like a call center, with calls constantly in queue from repair facilities? We had calls in queue non-stop, from clock in to clock out. If we weren't answering them quickly enough, we'd get an email that said, "Calls backing up, watch the queue." That was the most work he wanted to do. I think you can see where this is going. In comes the malicious compliance. From that point on, I made sure to take my time and document every single aspect of every denied claim, regardless of the reason for denial. Diesel F-250 with 20,000 miles needs an entire fuel system replacement that's covered under the factory warranty? Well, I could just take your part numbers down and deny, but not now. Oh, there are 50 part numbers and 4 different labor ops? I'll go ahead and verify those and then deny. Water intrusion into the shocks of this RV, even though it's clearly stated water intrusion isn't covered, I'll gladly take the 20 minutes required to sift through RV parts websites to verify pricing. Oh, and you have a requested labor time? Let me check our 5 labor guides to try to find it. Another 20 minutes gone. The best part was, I would get claims on vehicles and from customers that weren't even ours, but one of our competitors that had a similar name as us. Being the dutiful employee I was, I made sure to create a customer profile for them, a profile for the repair facility, one for their vehicle, and started a claim, fully vetted it, and then informed the facility it was actually our competitor who had the contract, not us. Now they were wasting 20 to 30 minutes on the phone when I already knew it wasn't with us. I verified every effing claim that was denied. I spent more time verifying denied claims than I did approved ones. Our call queue times more than tripled after a couple months. Then, we had to have one-on-one meetings with the VP to discuss why our production was falling. When my meeting came up, he said I went from being the fastest, most productive adjuster to failing below average, and asked what was happening. Did I have issues at the office? Issues at home affecting my production? I wanted to smile and laugh, but I stayed as stoic as possible and told him that I remembered how much he hated to do work, so I wanted to make sure every denied claim had every T crossed and I dotted in case it came across his desk. He asked why I was doing it for claims that clearly would never be considered for approval, and I said that I was a lowly adjuster and could never know when he might have to approve an otherwise denied claim, and wanted to do my job to the best of my ability to help him out. I left a couple months later, but was told by a friend who worked there that the VP left the company to pursue other opportunities, and was replaced by the awesome manager who I had reported to directly. I guess the dealership started complaining about wasted time on the phone on top of all the queue delays. The complaints finally got sent up to the CEO and out he went. Isn't this classic Manglement 101? Take a system that's working and then improve it so that it takes 3 times as long? Funny, that seems to be a trend in the stories today. Maybe all of the OPs, if they listen to this video, should send a copy of it to their managers so their managers can listen to it and realize just how much of a big idiot they actually are. Oh, I guess that's wishful thinking, but here it is, it's 12:30 a.m. and my brain just went there because sometimes you just gotta stick it back to the managers. Check out all the OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.